what only became obvious in hindsight. At the time, nothing felt unusual. The days moved forward as they always had. Decisions were made with the information available, guided by logic, advice, and the best intentions they could manage. And yet, this story begins much later, 97 at the moment they finally understood what none of those decisions revealed while they were making them. We often believe clarity belongs to the present, that if something matters, we should recognize it immediately. But many of the most important truths only reveal themselves after distance has done its work. This matters today because so many people judge their past harshly, unaware that understanding often arrives only after the path has already been walked. Looking back, they could trace the line clearly, the choices that felt confusing, the decisions that seemed reasonable but unsatisfying, the moments of discomfort they dismissed as temporary. At the time, each one felt isolated, manageable, easy to explain away. Only later did the pattern emerge. In the middle of it all, they believed they were being practical, making smart compromises, delaying gratification, telling themselves clarity would come later. Once they reached the next milestone, that belief carried them forward for years. It justified staying. It justified settling. It justified ignoring questions that felt inconvenient. The first hint of hindsight arrived quietly, not as regret, but as recognition. They noticed how often they had overridden instinct with explanation, how frequently they chose what made sense over what felt right. At the time, those choices felt mature, responsible, necessary, but seen from a distance, a different truth appeared. They hadn't been patient. They had been postponing honesty. What became obvious in hindsight wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern of self-silencing, a habit of choosing coherence over alignment. And once that realization surfaced, it reframed the entire past 97 not as failure, but as preparation. Because hindsight doesn't accuse, it reveals. And what it was about to reveal would change how they understood every choice that followed. With that recognition, the past reorganized itself. Moments that once felt insignificant now carried meaning. Each compromise, each delay, each rationalization formed a consistent thread. They hadn't been avoiding effort. They had been avoiding confrontation, 97 with themselves. The conflict deepened as they revisited decisions they once defended confidently. Not because they were wrong, but because they were incomplete. The logic had been sound. The timing had been reasonable. But something essential had been left out each time, 97 their own voice. And over years, that omission had accumulated quietly. They remembered how often they told themselves, just for now, just until things stabilize, just until this phase passes. That language had softened discomfort enough to make it tolerable, but it had also postponed clarity again and again. Hindsight revealed how temporary solutions had slowly become permanent structures. The tension peaked when they realized how different the choices might have been if honesty had been allowed earlier. Not dramatically different 97, but truer, slightly bolder, slightly more aligned. The realization wasn't painful. It was sobering, because it showed how easily a life can drift when instinct is repeatedly deferred. Yet there was no regret, only understanding. They saw now that they hadn't lacked courage. They had lacked perspective. The insight they carried today simply didn't exist back then. It had to be earned through experience, repetition, and consequence. The past hadn't been wasted. It had been informative. And that understanding softened the weight of hindsight. It transformed self-criticism into self-knowledge. What once felt like missed opportunities now looked like necessary chapters. 97, each one, contributing data the present self depended on. The clarity arriving now wasn't late. It was finally complete. With understanding came a deeper conflict. Knowing what had been missed created a new responsibility. 97, deciding what to do with that knowledge now. Insight, once gained, removes innocence. They could no longer move forward the same way, guided only by logic and explanation. The emotional weight peaked as they realized how subtle the turning points had been. There was no single moment they could point to and say, that's where everything went wrong. The shifts were quiet, gradual, almost invisible while they were happening. And that made them harder to forgive themselves for noticing too late. They felt the pull of self-judgment. The temptation to replay the past and imagine alternate versions of life unfolding differently. But each imagined path revealed the same truth. Without the experiences they had lived, the clarity they held now would not exist. The insight wasn't delayed by mistake. It was delayed by necessity. The tension resolved into acceptance. They understood that hindsight is not a verdict. 97, it's a lens. It doesn't exist to punish the past, but to inform the future. The value wasn't in correcting what had been done. It was in recognizing what could no longer be ignored. That recognition changed how they viewed choice itself. Decisions were no longer about making the perfect move. They were about staying honest in real time, listening earlier, pausing longer, allowing instinct to speak before explanation silenced it. The lesson wasn't to avoid mistakes. It was to stop overriding awareness. The emotional peak arrived with a quiet promise they made to themselves, that the clarity earned through hindsight would not be wasted, that future choices would be guided not only by reason, but by alignment, that postponing honesty would no longer feel acceptable. Hindsight had done its work. Now it was time to let foresight do the rest. With foresight now sharpened by hindsight, the future took on a different shape, not clearer in detail, but steadier in direction. They no longer expected certainty to arrive fully formed. They expected awareness to guide them, moment by moment, choice by choice. The mistakes of the past stopped feeling like errors to correct. They became reference points, signals of what happens when instinct is ignored too long, when explanation replaces honesty, when alignment is postponed in the name of coherence. Those lessons didn't disappear. 97, they integrated, quietly influencing how decisions were made from then on. What changed most was timing. They listened earlier, paused sooner, paid attention to discomfort before it hardened into regret. When something felt off, they no longer rushed to justify it away. They treated it as information, not a command to act immediately, but a prompt to stay present. The future didn't unfold perfectly. There were still compromises, still uncertainty, still moments of doubt, but the relationship to those moments had changed. They no longer signaled failure. They signaled engagement, proof that they were actively participating in their life rather than inheriting it by default. Looking back one final time, they understood the real gift of hindsight. It wasn't clarity about the past, 97. It was permission in the present. Permission to trust awareness as it arises. Permission to choose alignment even when it complicates the story. Permission to believe that understanding arrives when it's ready, not when demanded. The path ahead remained unfinished, as all meaningful paths are, but it no longer felt deferred. Each step carried intention. Each choice carried voice. The future wasn't something waiting to be revealed. It was something being shaped, and the lesson that lingered above all others was simple and enduring. What becomes obvious in hindsight is often whispering in the present. The difference is whether we're willing to listen. So what do you think? 97, are you hearing the signals now, or leaving them for hindsight to explain later? What only